Benjamin Netanyahu seems to be retaining his grip on power. Israel's prime minister has likely secured a record fifth term in office after Tuesday's elections.
I intend to quickly finish the work in order to form a national, stable government.
The head-to-head race against his main rival Benny Gantz was widely seen as a referendum on Netanyahu himself. Netanyahu has been in power since 2009 and is facing possible indictment over a series of corruption allegations. He has denied any wrongdoing. The graft case comes at a time when the central bank and economists warn of economic challenges. In February, the 12-month budget deficit grew to 3.5% of GDP, well above the 2.9% government target and the highest ever for the month. The debt-to-GDP ratio is an indicator of a country's ability to pay back its debt. It rose for the first time in a decade to reach more than 61%. The Bank of Israel trimmed its economic growth estimate to 3.2% this year from 3.4%. That's below last year's 3.3%. The bank called for spending cuts and tax increases to keep the budget from spiraling out of control. Netanyahu has long taken credit for the country's booming startup scene. But it employs only around 10% of the labor force, so the vast majority of Israelis aren't part of it. The country ranks high on inequality studies, with 14% of its workers living in poverty. And Palestinian Israelis, who make up around 20% of the population, are barely part of Israel's economic development projects.
All the Israeli leaders, all of them work against the Palestinian people, specifically this government with Netanyahu's lead. It has confirmed that they do not want peace.
To attract far-right votes, Netanyahu promised to annex Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. Some Israelis are disappointed by the lack of change.
I'm devastated, absolutely devastated. We're surrounded by right-wing radical people who want to annex more territories.
After the results of this week's elections, Netanyahu is not only expected to continue his policy of occupation, he could also try to win immunity from prosecution and thus fend off calls to step down. Sibel Karkus, TRT World.
And for more on this, TRT World's editor-at-large Craig Copetas joins us now from Paris. Hi, Craig. This result really does cement his reputation as a political survivor, doesn't it? And that's despite all of these impending indictments on 3 separate corruption charges, no less. How did he pull it off?
By putting together an extreme far-right coalition that included a lot of the extreme religious parties. He promised them annexation of land, which they like to hear. He promised that they would minimize the power of the High Court, which they like to hear. He thumped the tub for Israeli sovereignty over as much of Palestinian territory as possible. And he had Donald Trump in his back pocket. That's why he won.
Yes, let's talk about that Trump effect, because Netanyahu's ruling Likud party used massive posters of Netanyahu and Trump shaking hands. What sort of an effect did the US president's friendship have on his re-election success?
I think it had minimal impact amongst most of the voters. Remember, the Blue and White Party got 1 million votes, which is phenomenal. Given that there's roughly 4 million voters in Israel. Be careful what you wish for. This Donald Trump peace plan done by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, that looks to be a non-starter and a red herring from everything I'm hearing, because whatever it is, Netanyahu is going to have to get those same ultra-right-wing political and religious elements to go along with the plan, and they don't like that. On top of that, they're looking at kind of a unilateral peace process now. The United States has never endorsed a unilateral peace process in the Middle East. It's always been multilateral, to bring in the Arab countries, Egypt, and some others. And finally, this is going to cost Netanyahu in the cabinet, because to get the support of these radical parties, he's going to have to pay them off. And Israel, as our report mentioned, is having some financial tribulations at the moment.
Let's look at Israel's economy now, because Netanyahu he's been in power for around 10 years and he has presided over a reasonably robust economy. The country has just entered its 16th year, consecutive year of growth. Do you expect that to continue under another Netanyahu term in office?
Yeah, I think so, despite the warning signs. Look, I always look at national debt first, and they have about $216 billion of what they call gross debt. That's about $9 billion a year in interest payments. And, you know, the thing is, a government can comfortably continue to increase its national debt, borrow money from its friends, as long as it can ensure constant growth in GDP. That's what Netanyahu has to make happen. Excuse me, and that is what his coalition partners are going to be trying to drain money from. Excuse me, I have a cold today. On top of that, Netanyahu has some powerful economic partners in this. He has Trump, he has Sisi, he has the president of Brazil, and he has Vladimir Putin.
He sure does, and we understand that we can expect official results by Friday. Craig Copetas in Paris, thanks as always.